Hello friends, today's video is a little bit different. This is part of a collaboration with 7 other amazing YouTube artists. Etellan, Jackyohhh, Krystal's Fantasy, Josephine's Creatures, Unniedolls, Crafts and Kay's One of a Kind Factory. Links are in the description box. We decided to make Valentine's Day dolls. Once you've watched this video, please check out their links in the description box below. They're so incredibly clever and their dolls are absolutely stunning. Please go and give them some love. I'll be using this Frankie Stein as a base. I'm borrowing some arms from Cleo Denial and I'm prepping her as usual. I'm rerouting her with carrot cake from dollyhair.com. I find sometimes that the colours on the website show differently to how they appear in sunlight. If you get in contact with dollyhair.com, they'll actually send you some samples. Once I was finished, I used PVA glue inside the head to hold the plugs in place. I just squeeze some in and then squish it around and use a Q-tip to try and make sure that it's touching all the plugs inside her head, and then I leave it for a couple of days to dry. This doll is based on a box of chocolates, but while I was talking to my sister who lives in the Netherlands, we were talking about the chocolate sprinkles that are available on bread for breakfast, and they're called hagelslag, and I thought that that was just the cutest name for a chocolatey witch, so she became like a Lolita witch. I'll talk a little bit more about the theme later. This is the pattern that I made for the dress. I figured out how long her waist was, which isn't really necessary because I'm going to gather it anyway, and then I freehanded a curve, figured out how long I wanted the dress to be, bearing in mind that I wanted to add ruffles to the bottom, and then freehanded a second curve. I want the top of the sleeve to be a puffball, so this is why it's that strange shape. I want to use chiffon, so it's going to give a really beautiful texture and be sheer. I did cut this on the fold, but it might be a better idea to actually just cut it single thickness because it's quite difficult. I made sure to add a little bit extra to the front of this piece because I want to add like a fake button placket later. I'll show what I mean later in the video. Chiffon is stunning, but it frays like anything, so once I've cut out the pieces, I made sure to brush some fabric glue around the edges to stop that from happening. This glue dries clear, but it does dry shiny, so all the sides with the glue on will be the wrong side of the fabric. I used masking tape to make these patterns, and I've linked my video in the description box to help you with that. Off camera, I sewed the shoulder seams together. To create the puffball for the sleeves, first you need to sew a running stitch along the top edge and then pull that to gather it. You should pull it until it kind of looks like the same shape a regular sleeve pattern would. When you draft a doll sleeve pattern, you don't need to make that bell shape at the top. Those in human clothes are so that you have ease to move your arm, but the dolls don't need the comfort to move their arms, so it's just adding complication. Just a regular U shape is fine when you're making doll clothes. This running stitch that we're sewing to make the gathers needs to be sewn inside the seam allowance. We're just going to treat this as a normal sleeve now and sew it into the shoulder. I like to pin quite a lot here just to make sure that the gathers are evenly spaced across the shoulder hole, and then I sew it in as I normally would. Once that's sewn, we just sew the entire seam from the wrist to the waist, all the way down the sleeve and the body. The bottom of the shirt isn't going to be particularly neat. It doesn't really matter because this is going to be totally covered by the dress anyway. So I'm putting this on Abby to make sure that it fits, and then I'm pinching where I want that button placket to be. Then I'm pinning that and then sewing 3 tiny buttons to the top. I'm not sewing any more than that because they just won't be visible, so it's just a waste. For the rest of the button placket, I'm just sewing 2 neat rows of running stitches. I want the cuffs to be gathered as well, so I'm sewing a really small running stitch around the wrist while it's on the doll, and then I pull it together around the wrist to make sure that it's the right size. To make the cuff part of the sleeve, I'm using a piece of ribbon. I've burnt both of the ends to make sure that it won't fray, and then I'm just whip stitching it around Abby's wrist to make sure that it's the right size. I've put her hand back on so that it doesn't slip off. So once I've whip stitched it to itself as the cuff piece, I'm then going to whip stitch the gathered chiffon sleeve into the ribbon as well. This was a little bit fiddly and hard to film, but I used a thinner ribbon to make like a standing up high collar. I melted the ends of this as well to make sure that it doesn't fray. This one I just sewed with a running stitch rather than a whip stitch. So all these dark colours aren't exactly the easiest thing to see, I realised while I was filming. To make this ruffle at the top of the collar, I glued a small rectangle of chiffon and then folded it in half and gathered it with a running stitch at the bottom. Then I sewed it to the top of the ribbon. I added Velcro as a closure, but only to the ribbon at the collar, just because the chiffon can't really handle a closure and we're going to have the rest of the dress anyway. I drew around the pattern pieces for the dress onto brown cotton and then glued the edges as I usually do. I transferred the markings for the darts onto the front bodice piece and then sewed those into the bodice. I then ironed those darts. Make sure to iron as you go when you're making doll clothes. This makes a huge difference to the finished look of the piece. I hemmed the skirt using a blind hem stitch. So on the back side of the piece I do quite a long stitch, and then on the front it just catches a couple of threads so you can't really see it, and then I ironed this again. Off camera I added the two side panels to the bodice, and now I'm just adding the chiffon ribbon to the front of the bodice piece. I decided to ruffle it, so the easiest way to sew this in was to use about 1 billion pins and then just do a running stitch. On top of that I added some wine coloured lace. I then sewed the bodice and the skirt together. I first gathered the skirt and made sure that I had 1 centimetre on either side for the closure that wasn't gathered, and then pinned the bodice and the skirt together to make sure that the gathers were pretty even. I sewed the back of the skirt closed and added some Velcro in the bodice as a closure. I spaced these pins out evenly around the dress. This is where I'm going to add ruching. I didn't film the ruching very well, unfortunately. It's just a small running stitch of about 2 centimetres that you then pull tight to gather, in the same way that I've gathered everything else in this video. I added more of that red chiffon lace around the bottom of the dress, again trying to ruffle it a little bit. To make sure that I can put the straps for the dress in the right place, I put the dress on Abby again over the top of the shirt. Again, I'm using my hair straightener as an iron. This time it's to make these tiny little straps. I glued the edges of this fabric, and I didn't realise actually that when I heated it up again it would glue itself shut, so I didn't need to sew it at all. To hold this dress in its like cupcake shape, I'm going to need some petticoats, so I'm using more of that black chiffon. I cut a couple of big rectangles and then glued around the edges to make sure that they don't fray. Then I turned up one edge to make sure that the glued edge wouldn't be the bottom, because it won't fray doesn't mean it won't look good. So giving that fold I thought would give it a bit more finish. I then sewed the gathers to a piece of satin, which will be the waistband for the petticoats. Again, for more volume in the skirt, I added tulle is a biscuit. I added tulle to the inside of the skirt. While I was making the dress, it kind of got a little bit more complicated, so I thought it looked too plain, or it was just disconnected, you know? So I decided on the bodice to add some lacing with embroidery floss. Usually when I'm embroidering I use just 3 strands, but this time, because I wanted it to appear thicker, I used all 6. I used some white satin ribbon to make some bows. I didn't want to use the lighter to singe the edges because that would be visible from the front, so I just glued a bit of fabric glue on the back, which will hold the fibres together and stop them from fraying. I added some thin white ribbons to the waist of the dress. To make the hat, I used a piece of paper to find the circumference of the doll's head. I then looped that into a circle, drew around it, and that will be the inside hole of the brim. Then I free-handed the rest of the brim around that. For the cap part, I used that piece of paper that I found the circumference with again and kind of laid that in a curve. I didn't want this to be like a normal symmetrical cone-shaped witch's hat. I wanted it to be kind of a bit more cute or goofy, I think. So I drafted this shape using concave curves, which will give me a bit of a leer pipe shape. I sewed together the pieces using a whip stitch. With the cap I alternated sides, but with the cap to the brim I just used a regular whip stitch. I added some white ribbon on one side of the hat. My chocolate box inspired doll has to have some chocolate, so I used the air drying clay that I love, link below, with a discount code, to make the basic shapes in white first, and then I covered them with brown. And then once they were dry, I trimmed the edges. This is to kind of give them that foot that they get from like an enrobing machine. The couple of white chocolates that I did, I added some pastels to give a bit of shading, and then all of them I glossed with some semi-gloss varnish from Mr. Hobby. I ordered some fake whipped cream for this project, but it didn't arrive in time for me to actually use it. I found a tutorial about how to make my own on YouTube, which I've linked. So it just uses the super light paper clay and then water to get it to a piping consistency. I added some paint to get the colour that I wanted. Results were okay, but they're not as good as like the proper decadent whipped cream, which is shinier. But to be fair, because it was so much brown, I think the difference in kind of texture helps differentiate it from the rest of the dress. So once the cream was in the consistency that I wanted it, I put it into this plastic piping bag and then just piped it onto the hat and onto the dress. You can find piping tutorials on YouTube. I then added the chocolates and some satin ribbon roses and some rhinestones. So the ribbon roses I made myself. A friend on Instagram, DollyBonita22, put a tutorial up on her channel, which I've linked below. I just thought it was genius because they're so easy and they are quite expensive in the shop if you buy them. Here I'm making a handbag for my doll. So I started by making this heart shape on paper and then tracing it onto cardboard. So I need 2 layers of the cardboard and then I cut around it on styrofoam as well. The styrofoam was a bit thick, so I just sliced it in half. I covered everything with red satin, and I was using contact cement actually accidentally on this one, which you need to let dry before you kind of stick. It worked pretty well. The edges weren't particularly neat, so I ended up whip stitching around the whole thing, which really tidied the edges. On one side of the cardboard hearts I added a darker ribbon, and on the sides I added jump rings so that I can add a chain. So I still thought that there was some like kind of disconnection between the top and the bottom of the dress, so I decided to add some thin white ribbons and then do crosses over those with embroidery floss again. I think it really helped to tie the dress together. Spoiler alert, I had some serious issues with this face up, so I'm just going to whiz you through this first one. I did the second one in a really similar way, so I'm not really skipping over anything particularly interesting or valuable. While I was making this doll, I had some kind of personal stuff going on. It really came out in my doll. At first I really hated the clothes, and it took Jackyohhh talking me out of completely starting the whole thing again. The colours on Abby just were looking wrong to me, and then she said to try it onto the doll whose face colour I changed with the airbrush, and she was right, so that worked. And then obviously I kept adding to the clothes as well, which helped more. So I think the first issue that I had personally when I was going through this doll was that I was getting sick, and it came on kind of like it snuck up on me a bit. I went from feeling a bit rubbish and I wasn't quite sure why, and I checked my temperature when I was leaving work. We always have thermometers at work because I work at preschool, and my temperature was really getting up there. And then the next day I went to the doctors and I had a pretty high fever. Got me to take my temperature, sat me down in the waiting room, and then within about a minute they'd told me to go into one of the diagnosis rooms, consulting rooms, whatever they're called, and there was two nurses in there and they just said cancer, and I was like, oh no, I know what this means. They did me a flu test, and I've never had a flu test before I came to Japan, but they are pretty on it here. They like doing them, and so if you go to a doctor, usually they'll just ask you if you want one, but this time, I think because this was before the coronavirus was doing the rounds, but we've had the flu pretty badly around this year. I think about a third of the staff and kids at school have been off at some point with it. So anyway, they do this flu test, and I don't know if you've had one before. They are awful. They put this swab inside your nose to like basically swab behind your eyeballs, it feels like, and it's absolutely horrific. I was streaming tears, and it's so uncomfortable, and like the whole time they were doing it I was saying, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. The nurses are just laughing at me. So I go back out to the waiting room, and then when I'm called in to see the doctor, and this doctor speaks English, which is really lucky because I'm just in this little suburb outside of Osaka, and you wouldn't think that a tiny little doctor's surgery they'd have English speaking doctors, and they have two actually. So this doctor, she's like, it's not the flu, and I'm like, yeah, I didn't think it was. I think I've got tonsillitis. So for Americans that would be strep throat. And she had a look, and like my throat was just white, and I used to get tonsillitis about once a month when I was 14, 15, and I don't know how I survived it, because honestly I had a high fever for 3 days, and literally all I did was lay on the sofa. Like I didn't even have the energy to reach and lift up my phone to look on Instagram. I was eating ice pops just so that I could manage to eat a little bit of food to get some painkillers in me. But Japanese doctors, I just got cold and flu medicine, so I pay my national health insurance, which is means tested, so I think it's about 10% of my earnings goes, no it's not, it's more than that, it's 20% of my earnings goes to health insurance and pension, and then, is it that much? Yeah, I think it is. And then my employer pays as well. So then if I go to that doctor for a cold, it's about $10 for the like consultation, and then you get your prescription for cold and flu medication, which will then cost you about another $10. But the thing is, they give you antibiotics as well, and anybody with a bit of nous knows that antibiotics aren't going to work for a virus because they work against bacteria. So I got these antibiotics. Normally I will ask if they're actually necessary, and generally they're not, and she'll just say to come back if I don't get better. But this time I took them, I just wasn't thinking about it. I should have asked. And then so once my throat kind of cleared up, it still wasn't great. I then had tummy troubles because of the antibiotics. Very TMI this video. I'm sorry, it's gone from cultural waffle to Dolly Mixtures tells all. But yeah, so that was happening when I was doing the dress, and then when I was doing this face up, that was like the second week that I was still ill, so I was pretty stressed out, and work weren't being particularly good about it, and like I have to do quite a lot of singing at work and talking, and with a sore throat it's just not what you want to be doing. And I was doing this face up and I just wasn't feeling the face up at all, and I couldn't get the eyes right. I was getting quite upset about it, and then later on even the face up just got worse, and I couldn't even lay down a colour, and I just had no idea what was going on. She's got 10 to 2 eyes anyway, so like she did need redoing. And recently this is how I like to curl my doll's hair. So you just run a hot straightener over the piece of hair and then wrap it around something. I happen to have my screwdriver to hand, so that's what I used, but you could use like the handle of a paintbrush or a pencil or anything. If you use something metal, it's going to heat up, so be careful with your fingers, but if you use a pencil it doesn't really keep that much heat. I ordered some tights from AliExpress, but they didn't make it in time, so I just used some lace. This isn't stretch lace actually, but it does go on and off, given some encouragement. I'm just adding some elastic here to the waist. The shoes are just some that I had in my stash that I added some brown wash to kind of pick up on the details. These little frills on her shoes I did with just a piece of ribbon and some more rhinestone. And then I put her together. I really did like the outfit and the clothes at this point, but just the face, I was so upset with how her face up had turned out. I had to redo it. Foreshadowing, notice how glossy her face is. That will come up later. Absolute nightmare fuel here. So I airbrushed her with the Vallejo paints again, and then prepped her with 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear, and I could not get the pencil to lay down whatsoever. Like, I'm really struggling with this and just trying, and again notice that shine. That's going to come up again later. I could get the pastels to lay down a little bit, but it still had kind of a weird texture, and I really couldn't figure out why, and I thought it could be the weather, because Mr. Super Clear can be pretty temperamental in cold temperatures. Usually that's easily combated by running the can under hot water from the tap for 5 minutes and then drying it in somewhere warm. My apartment's been really cold, so I turned on my space heater and was drying it in front of the space heater, but still something wasn't working. So after battling for about 2 layers, I went to spray between the layers again, because I can't build up any colour on this shiny texture. So I went to run the can under the hot water, and I noticed I had in my hand a can of Gloss Mr. Super Clear. So they look so similar. There's just the tiniest print that says gloss and flat, and it makes a huge difference. So once I noticed I'd done that, I covered the gloss can in bright pink masking tape so that I won't do this again. So once I started using flat Mr. Super Clear instead of gloss, I didn't have an issue again. Always making sure that my pencils were sharper, and then bearing in mind everything I've learned with the face up that I've literally just done. I did it in exactly the same way, so I didn't really want to use dark colours again. I think this is something that I'm probably moving towards in my doll face ups. Like, one of the things that I was most upset about with the first face up was that I didn't feel like it was me. Like, I don't think I have a particularly strong style, but I do think that I have a bit of one. I'd like to definitely cultivate a stronger style. Definitely go and have a look at some of the artists in this collab, because they really do have their own strong individual styles, which is one of the reasons I love these artists so much. They're not just doing the same as everybody else, they really have their own thing, and that's something that I aspire to, definitely. So for me, for sure, it's not using too much black, I think, and then trying to stay on theme. So with this one, I'm using like wine colours and reds because I want it to be similar to her hair colour. So I didn't talk about all of the inspiration for this doll yet, but I think I started thinking about this doll a really long time ago, probably maybe October, maybe not, maybe around that time. I started watching Lovely Law, who is a Lolita YouTuber, and she and her girlfriend make really cute content, and they're just awesome to watch. They're so positive, and like, they're just really sweet. They're really lovely to watch. And then their friend Tyler as well. So I think I started watching Tyler a couple of years ago, and then she popped up on my feed again. And so I really wanted to do a Lolita inspired doll. I've wanted to wear Lolita fashion for a long time, but like, I just don't have the money to do it. They're so expensive. I thought about making a Lolita dress, but then I still don't have anybody to wear it with, and I think part of Lolita is the strong community. That's really what it stands out to me. So I don't know if this dress would kind of be a sweet Lolita style. I'm not really sure. Like, honestly, it is kind of inspired a bit by Lovely Law's girlfriend Holly, because she wears like cutesy but goth. Anyway, so I watched quite a lot of Law's videos when they were talking about coords, and I tried to follow her advice to put together a good coord for my doll, and I really do like how she turned out, and I kept the colour story together, I think. Even though I wasn't sure with the red and the brown together at first, I'm glad I stuck to my guns with the brown, because it is really chocolatey. Definitely go out and check out Lovely Law. I've linked her in the description box below, and Scarfing Scarves is Tyler. She's like, they're so cute together as well, because Lovely Law is an absolute sweetheart, and then Tyler has this really like dry sense of humor, and she's very sarcastic. I like them together a lot. They're fun to watch. So I said before that I wanted to talk about Japanese Valentine's Day in a future video, and that is today, I guess. So Japanese Valentine's Day is totally different to Valentine's Day that I've experienced anywhere else. Like, ideally, I think most people think that Valentine's Day is like a couple's thing and you both do nice things for each other, or I think a lot of people think that it's up to guys to do something traditionally romantic for like their female partner usually, but in Japan that's not the case at all. Valentine's Day is a day where you give gifts to your boyfriend. So I'm going to be talking very heteronormatively, and honestly I'm not really sure what gay couples do, so please let me know in the links below if you have any experience of gay couples in Japan with Valentine's and White Day, because I've been single for a long time, so I don't really know. So Valentine's Day, the girlfriend will give chocolates to the guy, or like if you like someone you'll give the guy chocolates, and you'll go to a fancy restaurant. Like, I talked to my co-worker, and when I asked her about what kind of restaurant, she said takai, and like that can mean expensive or tall, but she did like the hand gesture for tall, and I was like, do you mean tall? And she was like, yeah, tall. I was like, what? So I think she means like one of the like literally high up restaurants with like a nice view, because I think they are expensive as well, to be fair, so it ticks off both boxes. The month after, March 14th, and I think this is the same in Korea as well, is the opposite. So that's called White Day, and that's when like the guy does nice things for the girl. I find it all kind of weird. Anyway, so at my first company here in Japan, I was working at an English conversation school, and so there were like 5 Japanese female staff. There was me, and then my co-worker who was Japanese American. And on Valentine's Day, and this blew my mind, and it kind of made me angry, like one of the girls just like walked over and gave him a box of chocolates, and she was married, like, and it wasn't anything like romantic or anything. She just walked over and gave him a box of chocolates. I'm like, what? And then like one of his students gave him 20,000 yen, which is like roughly $200, just gave it to him. Yeah, I was just mind blown. And then, but like, I think the rest of the staff, or at least me and the girl that sat next to me, we did what's called giri choco, which is like for friends. So she made brownies for everybody, and I must have made cookies or something, I don't remember. This is like 8 years ago now, really long time ago. So now I work with almost exclusively women, and we tend to do giri choco, so the friend's chocolate. I think that's really sweet, like just give everybody chocolate, which I would usually do before that. Actually, I think for me Valentine's is a nicer experience when it's for friends rather than romantic. I think it's like there's a lot of pressure when it's romantic. I'm not a huge fan of it. What do you think? What are there different romantic like Valentine's traditions in your culture? Like, let me know about your feelings on Valentine's Day. I'm not into it personally. Like for me, romantic is spontaneous. So like planning to go out for a meal, or like this. Oh my gosh, I can remember. I think I was 17. My boyfriend at the time took me for a meal, which was so kind, but it was so expensive, and it was like candlelit, so it was just dingy, and like there were too many people around, and like I'd just rather be at home and have takeaway, to be honest, and it just be us two. It's not romantic for me, you know. I don't know, let me know in the comments, tell me your romantic experiences. So one of the things that I know that I really want to get in my dolls is like that glowy eye look. I think it's just absolutely beautiful, and I definitely got it on the Colonel. I have another doll in the works, so I need to check her eyeballs out. I'm not sure if I did it on her, but I got it on this one as well. The first time I did her face up, not so much, but the second time I definitely did. Like with the Colonel, I used acrylic paints, and that gives you incredible opacity very, very quickly, but not much working time. So on this doll, I used tube watercolor paints, and it gave me a lot of control because they're translucent, so you do need to layer for opacity, but because of that, like, you're not going 0 to 100 in one layer, you know. Another thing I've wanted to try on my dolls for a really long time is adding freckles, because I do think freckles on actual humans are one of the most adorable features, but I was kind of nervous to do it on my dolls. Do these freckles. I talked to Jackie again, and she convinced me to give it a go. She does it a little bit differently to me, so she told me to cover the eyes, so I'm just using a little bit of washi tape over her eyes, and then I used some watered down tubey watercolor paints, and then just splattered on a piece of paper first to test it out, and then over the doll. And then because it's watercolor paints, you can just like use a wet Q-tip to take it off any areas you don't want, or like if you do it gently, you can kind of take off a little bit of the paint, not all of it, so it just softens the freckles a little bit. So the curl didn't hold, so I went through it again and just added some loose curls because it's going to fall out anyway, but it just added a bit of a bouncy wave, which I think looks really cute, which you'll see in the photos in a minute. This definitely works a lot better on Doll Planet hair, so maybe dollyhair.com just prefers a boil wash. These little Swarovski crystals came in a pack of 2 and I just thought they were too perfect to not have as earrings. I also added this little charm as a necklace, and she's got a heart charm on her bag as well. So I pinned her hat through her head to make sure that it'll stay in place, and I'm trying to style it a little bit wonky. What do you think to her in the end? I'm really proud of what I was able to achieve with this doll. Like, she's a little bit different to my concept art, but I think she's better. Like, I added to the costume and I think I just made her a really cohesive story. I'm just so proud of what I could achieve, even though it was an insane amount of work and some unreal editing and just having to do stuff over and over again. I really hope you like her, and I hope you like watching the video as well. And I realised that this is a ridiculously long video, and again, I'm sorry for that one. I think usually because I just don't show making the clothes in the video, but this one I did film all the pieces because there was just so much to it, and I have been asked before about parts of the things that I was making in this, so I hope you found it helpful. Please go and check out the videos of the other guys that made dolls. They're so clever and really kind people as well. We were chatting while we were making the dolls, and getting to know them was really great. So I hope you like their stuff too. As always, thank you for watching. I think there's probably only 2 of you left at this point. I'm so sorry the video is so long. I will try my best to get it a bit shorter next time. So thank you again, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye!